Good afternoon. If you just turned in, my name is Rebecca Sharp. I'm an archive specialist at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. I provide reference services for the general public. I have a few quick notes before we get started. You can submit your questions for our speaker via Twitter at #GenFair2014 or via Twitter chat or via YouTube chat. The speaker may not be able to answer all of the questions during the allotted 10-minute Q&A session. For captioning, go to the FAIR website and click on the link for today. The lectures will be recorded and posted on the FAIR website by the end of November. If you're following along on the schedule, this is lecture number 15 and is entitled Vets and Feds in the Family Tree, Military and Civilian Personnel Records. Our speaker is Theresa Fitzgerald. This presentation will highlight the records maintained by the National Archives at St. Louis, detailing the official military personnel files, or OMPFs for short, and civilian personnel records available to the public. We will also explain the National Personnel Records Center's functions, including the differences between the two facilities, records holdings, and access. Theresa is an archivist who works with the military personnel records at the National Archives at St. Louis, Missouri. And I'm turning the microphone over to Theresa.
Hi, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to be speaking to you about official military personnel files and official personnel files. More of an overview from what you've heard in the prior two sessions. So the military and civilian personnel files are all held in St. Louis, Missouri. They do take up the same space in the same building. However, there are different custody chains for the different types of records. And I will go into more detail on slide 4. Yes, thank you. So the National Archives at St. Louis, in which I'm an archivist with, maintains the records that are in the legal custody of the National Archives. These records are the records that are available for research to the public. All of the information is open except for any information protected by the personal privacy exemption of the Freedom of Information Act, or otherwise known as FOIA B6. This is going to be information concerning sexuality preference or health concerns, dates of birth, or not dates of birth, my apologies, social security numbers is what I meant, things like that. On slide 5, the National Personnel Records Center side maintains the physical custody of records that are still in the legal custody of the creating service branch or agency, in this case the Department of Defense or the individual civilian personnel agencies that we also hold at our facility. Information contained in these records is still protected under the Privacy Act of 1974. It is only available to the public under conditions specified by the creating service branch agency and according to FOIA. So page 6, military personnel files or military personnel records. Page 7. The National Archives at St. Louis is able to make records or veterans records or civilian personnel records open to the public under a project we called Project 62. If the veteran was discharged, deceased, or retired 62 years prior to today's date, this is a rolling date, it becomes a permanent accession to the National Archives and Records Administration, and it becomes accessible to the public. So for example, if the veteran separated from military service before today's date in 1952, that's October 30th, 2014, or October 30th, 1952, the record is archivable. If the veteran separated from service after today's date in 1952, then the record is an unaccessioned federal record and is not available to the public. On page 8, unaccessioned federal records are the official military personnel files from all service branches for veterans with the separation date of tomorrow's date in 1952. This is only accessible to the veteran, the veteran's next of kin, or third parties with permission from the veteran or the veteran's next of kin. These records also include military health and medical records of discharged and deceased veterans, retirees, and military family members that might have been treated at a military service medical facility. Military personnel records are generally, in our case, for the National Archives at St. Louis, and this is where I'll mainly be talking about records that are accessioned into the National Archives. We generally break them up into 3 different categories, at least for this presentation. Official military personnel files, the records of persons of exceptional prominence, and auxiliary records. So what does official military personnel file contain? These were created primarily for administrative functions, and they contain information about the service history. So dates and types of enlistment, training, performance, disciplinary actions, emergency data, any administrative remarks. These may also contain birth certificates, marriage certificates, divorce decrees, letters, and photographs. Detailed information about the veteran's participation in specific battles or military engagements is not contained in the record. Here's an example of a Notice of Separation from U.S. Naval Service, or otherwise known later as the DD-214. This is an overall summary of service, and it is the most common form required in order to prove military service. Our facility holds records of every branch of the military: Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard. The dates range. Our oldest records are actually in our Navy branch. They date back to 1885, and Army is 1912, Air Force is 1947, because it wasn't created until 1947. The Air Force, prior to 1947, fell under the Army Air Corps or the Army Air Force. The Marine Corps, 1895, and Coast Guard is 1898. You will see that the cutoff here is 1952, because that is the date that the records are open and archivable. Our Persons of Exceptional Prominence collection contains people such as John Coltrane and Paul Newman, as pictured here. But they also contain records of presidents, members of Congress, famous military leaders, and other cultural figures. As a fun fact, our largest Persons of Exceptional Prominence, or official military personnel file, is that of Henry Hap Arnold, and his record actually contains 6,044 pages. Currently, there are over 100 personnel files digitized in this collection, and more are becoming available every day. We are doing this in order to ensure the protection of the original documents. If you would like a complete list of all of the persons of exceptional prominence that include digital and paper form, it is on our website, listed there, and it is also listed in the handouts that are provided on the virtual Genealogy Fair website. Auxiliary records. As many know, our old facility suffered a fire in 1973. It destroyed over 17 military records of the Army and Air Force from 1912 to 1963. In the Air Force, there are surnames Hubbard through Z were also destroyed. That's 80% destruction for Army and 75% destruction for Air Force. Approximately 6.5 million records were recovered. These will vary in what was recovered. Some will only have maybe 2 documents. Some might have half of the record, and others might just have water damage, and the entire record actually does still exist. It just needs to go through some preservation treatment. Here's an example of one of those burned records. So in order to supplement military service, we have auxiliary records. Some of these include the record groups that you just heard about in in the prior two presentations, the Selective Service, IDPS, General Court Martials, and Veterans claim files. But here is a more complete list of everything we use or could use to reconstruct service. Most of these records, there are several slides with auxiliary service records. All of these are archivable and open to the public. They aren't only used to reconstruct service. You are also allowed to request them on their own. I'm sure the text is very small on your computers. This is also in the handouts. So one of the main groups we use to reconstruct service are morning reports and unit rosters. These were created as part of personnel and payroll functions by the military service departments. They are a daily account of unit activities. You will need to know the unit information of the veteran you are researching in order to locate the record, the morning report you need. These reports are located on microfilm, and we use certain indexes based on the unit information in order to pull the correct tape. The veteran that you are looking for will only appear on the morning report if he had a change in status, so if he was promoted or demoted or injured. These reports were used to verify events or assignments which might not be documented in the OMPS. However, on larger battle days, such as D-Day, they might not be recording that information on a morning report because I think they were otherwise engaged. These records, because they are on morning reports, can be hard to see on film. So we do require that you visit our research room in person or hire a researcher in order to look at these reports for you. And information on how to hire a researcher or make an appointment in our research room will be, I will speak about that later, but it is also on our website. The morning reports and unit rosters that are open to the public are the Army, which includes the Air Corps and the Air Force, from 1912 to 1959. The Air Force from 1947 to 1966 is also open to the public. The Army morning reports and rosters from 1960 to 1974 are not open to the public yet, and that is a group that you would want to contact the National Personnel Records Center in order to acquire. Another important group that assists us in reconstructing records are final pay vouchers and officer pay cards. There are about 19 million records in these groups. They provide the name, the service number, and the dates and character of service, which are the most critical service data elements in order to reconstruct military service. The Selective Service records, which David Harden went into detail about just a few hours ago, are located at our facility from World War II through the Vietnam era, with men born 1877 to 1957. The Selective Service cards, as well as classification ledgers, will go to prove whether or not that person served in the military. Now, if someone enlisted prior to being required to sign up for the Selective Service or the draft, then he will not have a Selective Service record, and we would use other means in order to reconstruct his service information. General Court-Martial records are one of my favorite record groups. We hold the records for the Army, General Court-Martial and Special Court-Martial records that resulted in a bad conduct discharge from 1918 to 1976. It will contain service information and prior service data if he enlisted prior to this particular time. Civilian personnel records. I would like to note that I mainly work with military personnel records and am filling in for the civilian personnel records expert. So if I accidentally say official military personnel file during this section, I apologize. We hold civilian personnel records that are archival and non-archival. Now, their date cutoff is different. It is not a rolling date. It ends in 1951. So archival records located at our facility are from the mid-19th century to 1951. These are in the complete custody of the National Archives, and information is available to the public. The non-archival records date from 1952 to the present. They are in the custody of the agency that created the record, but the National Personnel Records Center, like the military records, holds the physical custody of the actual records. Information in a non-archival record is only available to the public under FOIA and is protected by the Privacy Act of 1974. So included in the civilian personnel record holdings are employees who work for the following agencies. These are what are called umbrella agencies, the main larger group. I like to think of it as the agencies that you would hear more commonly: Department of Justice, the War Department, Veterans Administration, the Library of Congress. Now there are many groups that fall under the umbrella agencies called sub-agencies. These are smaller agencies that do fall under the larger ones. If you are only able to provide one of the smaller agencies as a place of civilian employment for your relative or the person you are researching, we have the ability to discover which larger agency your sub-agency falls under in order to locate a record. Civilian personnel record types include the official personnel folders and the service record cards. In the OPS, you may find the application, any correspondence, leave and pay information, letters of recommendation, photographs, and changes in work status. And here are some examples of documents and photographs that have been located in official personnel files. The other type is the service record card, and this is a general summary of the individual's employment with a specific agency. We also hold the records of the Civilian Conservation Corps and the Works Progress Administration. These are examples of CCC and WPA forms. Additionally, in the official personnel files and the CCC and WPA records, it will note whether or not a veteran was, or a civilian employee was a veteran. That is another source that we can use in order to prove military service. The civilian personnel files also have their own section of persons of exceptional prominence, although they don't follow the same accessioning rules, which I won't get into, but here are some excerpts from Albert Einstein's record. How to request records. This is the information you would need to request an official military personnel file. The veteran's complete name as it is used in service, the service number, the branch of service, the date and place of birth, and the dates of service. Approximate dates of service will help. It doesn't have to be exact. If you know your record, it was affected by the fire in 1973, additional information such as the place of discharge, last assigned unit, and place of entry into service may be useful to help us locate information relating to your relative. To locate a civilian personnel record, the full name of the employee and any alternate names or spellings, the date of birth, employing agency, the dates of employment, location of employment, and if you know the Social Security number. The CCC and WPA personnel records have their own request forms. They are located on the websites that are listed on this form as well as your handouts. But the full name of at the time of service, Social Security number, date and place of birth, their hometown, a parent's name, a spouse's name, dates of service, and location of employment will assist us in locating these records. To request copies of an official military personnel file. If you would like to request an archival official military personnel file, that's someone with a date of separation 62 years from today's date, you can mail in a standard Form 180 to request military records that is located on our website to the National Personnel Records Center at 1 Archives Drive. You also may fax that form to 314-801-9195 in order to get those requests to us. If you would like to acquire an unaccessioned federal record, which is someone with a separation date of 1962 or 52 or after, then you can complete a request online using our eVetRec system that can be found at our website, or you may also complete a standard Form 180. If you are the next of kin of a deceased veteran with an unaccessioned federal record, you will need to provide proof of death, and that can vary from anything, the death certificate to the obituary in the newspaper. If you would like to request civilian personnel records, selective service records, court-martial records, or any of those auxiliary series that were shown on those several slides earlier, you may mail a written request to our P.O. Box. You may also fax the request to 314-801-9187. Additionally, if you just have some inquiries, you may write to stl.archives@nara.gov, which I believe is on a slide coming up. If you would like to request a persons of exceptional prominence, you can write to pep.records@nara.gov. Here are some of our reproduction fees. Official military personnel files that are 5 pages or more are $70. 5 pages or less are $25. The selective service records, that's $20 for a ledger, $7 for a card, $27 total if you would like both. Service record cards for civilians are $7. The persons of exceptional prominence have 2 different formats. If it is not digitized and is only in paper form, it will be 80 cents per page. If it is in digital form, it will range from $20 to $250, depending on the size of the original record. Additional auxiliary series, such as burial files, chaplain files, are 80 cents per page with a minimum of $20. And Army General and Special Court-Martials have a tiered fee of $65, $98, or $145, depending on the size of the record. You are also welcome to visit our facility. We are located at 1 Archives Drive in St. Louis, Missouri. It is located off of Dunn Road and 270. We are open Tuesday through Friday from 7:30 to 3:45. If you would like to contact our research room, you may call 314-801-0850 or email the email address listed. An appointment is required in order to look at records in our research room. Here's some additional contact information. These are websites concerning military personnel records that are open to the public, records that are not open, persons of exceptional prominence, civilian personnel records that are open, and civilian personnel records that are not yet open. Here are also a list of our email addresses. General inquiries are to be sent to stl.archives@nara.gov, and we also have different email addresses for research room, persons of exceptional prominence, Facebook and Twitter inquiries, and public programs. At the bottom is the military personnel records reference archivist, that's myself, and my personal email address. You are always welcome to contact me directly. And the Civilian Personnel Records Reference Archivist, Ms. Ashley Mattingly, and her email address. I went through that pretty quickly.
Theresa, you have a
Yes.
few audience questions.
Okay.
The first one is, my father left active service in the Navy and subsequently went into the reserves. Is the rolling date only for active service, or would it include reserve time?
The rolling date includes reserve time. So it'll be the final date of any service, which includes reserve service.
The next question. Grandfather's OMPF goes out of the 52 waiting period this year, but my grandmother is still living. She is blind and cannot sign the papers. Do I still need permission to access his file?
No, once the record hits the 62-year rule, or today's date in 1952, that record is completely open to the public. Anyone can request it. Your neighbor could request it if they really wanted to.
The next question. Were the naval records damaged in 1973?
No, only Army and Air Force were damaged. There were some Navy medical records, very, very few, that were affected by the fire, but Navy official military personnel files were not affected and are completely intact.
Your next question. Included in the civilian personnel records are records for the Works Progress Administration of the Great Depression. Can you comment on the contents of those records?
They will include information concerning projects they worked on. If they had promotions, it might list next of kin, names and dates of birth, and different project locations that they were located at. If you want more detailed information on WPA records, I suggest contacting stl.archives@nara.gov.
The next question. What is the turnaround time to receive records of grandparents who served?
Well, if you would like to request the official military personnel file, the National Personnel Records Center works cases based on order of priority. So living veterans and next of kin that might be entitled to benefits for health emergencies or burials will be worked first. If you are doing genealogical research, your wait time might be a little longer. Additionally, the Records Center has a very large backlog. I would estimate your time to be at a month to 2 months. If you wanted to request auxiliary records, records located at the National Archives at St. Louis and actually worked by us, your wait time might be less than a month.
If my grandfather had a contract to help construct Army training camps in California during World War II, would he have a personnel file?
As far as I understand, contractors for government agencies were not considered actual civilian employment by a government agency, so they would not have a record here. But you are always welcome to submit that request, and that would be considered civilian work.
In the umbrella files for the post office, are these files for all civilian post office workers or just for military post office employees?
The civilian personnel records are for every civilian agency in the government, not only military related. So yes, that would include post office workers that worked for the post office in a civilian capacity.
A relative worked for the State Department. Don't know all dates, but have a date they definitely were in service. Is that enough?
As long as you have the full name and approximate dates that they were there, the department they worked for and their date of birth and maybe place of birth, that should be enough information to assist us in locating a record.
My grandfather worked in the Navy Yard at Vallejo, California, and in Washington, D.C. Would his records be in the civilian personnel records?
Yes, that will be a civilian personnel record.
Thank you, Theresa.
You're welcome.
If the speaker did not get to your question, please send an email to inquire@nara.gov. INQUIRE at N as in Nancy, ARA.gov as in Victor.